Hey everyone, I'm Alex Kehya, the host of the Index podcast and CEO of ABK Labs. And today I'm really excited to welcome my good friend, Brian Fox, to the show. He's my co-founder. Yeah, we're starting. Yeah. Well, show them what the book is about.
Oh, it's the GNU Bash reference manual. Well, I thought I would just kind of look at it quickly because earlier today I was talking to the third person to ever use the Bash shell. And I was kind of stunned by that. I mean, I'm the first.
Wait, how did you even run into them? What's the backstory of that again?
This is my friend Dante De Lucia, worked at Akamai for 25 years. And I met him originally at UCSB. Yeah.
And wait, did you guys just run into each other randomly, or did you have a phone call like scheduled or something, or like what?
Oh no, like
catching up?
I share my location with him.
Yeah.
And he's like, "You're in Santa Barbara. Come on over." So this is actually really funny though. I woke up today at 4:15 a.m. and I picked up my phone and I'm looking at my phone, and then at 4:17 I got a text from Dante saying, "Are we going to do breakfast today?" And I said, "Are you awake?" He's like, "Yeah." I said, "Can I come over and get some coffee?" So I went to his house at 5 a.m. and then we hung out for a few hours. Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know, Bash is a piece of open source software that my friend and co-founder Brian wrote back in the mid 80s. And and we'll talk about it in a second, but that time period is like the epicenter at the beginning of the open source movement. And open source software is the thing that powers like everything in the future of the internet. Basically the whole current internet, every version of the internet has been built with the backbone of open source on the back of open source software. Yeah. And we started as a kind of a joke with this book, the GNU Bash reference manual, which is by Chet Ramey and Brian Fox. I keep this. If you've ever watched my YouTube, you can see this yellow book. I've got a couple of Easter eggs about Brian that like are in my background, including this patent right here, which you can't see because it's blurred out, but it's a patent that I stole, which I think is hilarious because I stole one of Brian's patents, the actual metal patent from the office when we moved out of our old office. And Brian lives in Portugal now. And so I knew he couldn't do anything about it because he wasn't here.
Yeah.
So I stole it and I was like, just send you a picture.
Also, you're pretty good at grappling.
Yeah. That's what the black eye is from this week.
Yeah. That's what it looks like when you're good at grappling.
Yeah. Brian's been a huge inspiration to me as an entrepreneur. We worked together since I was probably, like in my early mid-20s. Yeah. And you're really the reason why I believe in open source software. I didn't even know what it was.
I mean, we were both in our mid-20s.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, I didn't even know who you were when we met. I got introduced to you by Steve Bell.
Right.
And I had this question about AI. I was looking at this AI company I was thinking about working with, and he was like, "You got to talk to my friend Brian." So we got coffee together, and then you invited me over to your office, and I ended up working out of there for basically forever. And so I wanted to do the show with you today because a lot of your story has inspired me, but I think it's also inspired basically the entire internet, you and like a handful of other people, to build. And it's really, a core part of what makes crypto and blockchain technology and AI as well work. So, the open source movement is anyway. So can you just talk about Bash and like that time and the kind of people involved and what the story was about how like the open source movement got?
So I want to talk about the open source movement a little bit. It's the free software movement, free as in speech, not as in beer, right? I want to talk about that a little bit because I think it's interesting. Every time I think about it, people want to hear about the arc, and I think more it's like an hourglass. So think about the top of the hourglass being where every engineer wanted to share every idea they had with every other engineer because they cared what their peers thought. They cared about respect and they cared about furthering science and things like that. And then at some point, engineering began to get more proprietary when certain companies thought, hey, maybe if we keep their engineering solutions secret, that will give us an advantage. And then free software started. And this thing started to grow open again. And so now we're kind of back to where we had originally started. The good news is we're back, but there's way, way, way more engineers now than there were in 1984.
Yeah, like when you were writing Bash and like email was like just invented, you literally knew 90% of the people who had email.
It was pretty bizarre. I was eating in a restaurant with a friend of mine, and I heard somebody at another table say the word email. So I got up from my table and went over to them and said, "Hi, I'm Brian," because I figured I had to know who they were.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And so Bash is today on billions of devices.
It is.
It's on the quadcopter in Mars.
It's the command line interface that connects scripts and human beings with the internal workings of a computer, the kernel, if you will.
So you could say it's critical infrastructure for many things.
Yeah, like on the Macintosh, it's called terminal. That's the way you would interact with it. On Linux, it's Bash. It's the Bash shell or the shell. And there's such a thing as a PowerShell on Windows. So for those three platforms, it's pretty clear.
But when you built Bash, you weren't like, I have this huge idea, we're going to make it open source and it's going to be on every machine. You were like, what was the impetus for it? Like, why did you even think to write Bash?
So smart engineers scratched their own itch. And the itch in this case was Richard Stallman had decided that the next useful operating system that academics would use would be the Unix operating system. And Unix at that time was 100% closed source, was completely proprietary, owned by Bell Labs, Sys5. BSD had a license to look at it, but nobody could touch the BSD code because it still belonged to Bell Labs. So Richard Stallman thought, you know what, like we used to do with list machines, I want to do the exact same thing with this kind of Unix system. And so he started writing some software. He ported his Emacs text editor to it. He did that in early 1984, I think. And then he put together a compiler called GCC and the beginnings of a debugger called GDB. And then I met him and we started working on building a complete set of utilities. Unixes are made of bunches of small programs that communicate with each other. And the command line is the thing that helps tie those little programs together to get bigger jobs done. And so these things existed, these concepts and these things already existed in a proprietary way. And we thought, you know what we can do? We can do a better job of delivering these. We can do a better job of building these utilities and we can make them be 100% open source. So we're sharing the ideas and other people can use these to build better systems.
And that was because, but the beginning, so Bash was the kind of connective tissue for all of that.
Yep.
Those little components.
Yes.
And it seems like to me like it just happened to be that like lots of pieces of software needed Bash to connect different components. Like it just kind of expanded from there.
Yeah. So for command line interface, you can either type at the command line and ask it to do things for you, or you can script it. You can take a series of instructions in. So for example, in Windows, you might have a .bat file, and that's a series of things that you might type to a command line. And when you execute them sequentially, one after the other, they do a job for you. You know, find a file named foo.bat, move the file foo.bat to this thing, you know, delete the other file over here. It's just like a series of things you might want to do. And you would then name that this batch file is to move file or something, right? And so the shell is the same thing. That's a command line interface, and we have the shell, Bash shell in this case, the same thing for all Unix-based systems. You can take all these little commands and put them together, take the outputs of those commands. The shell orchestrates things like taking text that comes out of one place and putting it into another command. It orchestrates all that and lets you run many commands simultaneously and have them all communicate, and that's what it does.
And so this was like a critical piece of software to make all this stuff work.
Core component.
One thing that I've like really drawn a parallel with in my career, you know, especially since I've been in crypto, is that you see a lot of similar stuff happening, like these core components that are missing from the space that seem, they're like really niche, like hyper focused things. But they end up being super important. It's like the idea that you need a text editor back then, like you had to have a text editor in order to write software.
That's correct.
And they didn't exist. You had to make one from scratch.
That's right.
So walk me through how that, so one other point I want to cover too is that like the reason Richard Stallman decided to build a Unix system was because some people at MIT's AI lab or like MIT decided to take a Unix system that they had been working on that was part of that sort of like academic
Not quite. There were a bunch of people working on a Lisp machine system,
Right.
Lisp system, which is a different programming language that was quite in vogue and still is useful in developing artificial intelligence and thinking about artificial intelligence, the original stuff, not the machine learning stuff, but the original stuff. And everybody used to collaborate on that. And then a group of people at MIT left to go build a proprietary company called Symbolics. And Richard Stallman was not part of that. And he was not sharing software with them. They were not giving software back to him. And so he thought, this is no good. We were sharing all these ideas. I'm going to make free and open software that is that machine. So he started doing that in 83 or something. And for about a year, he mimicked everything that these 15 genius programmers did. He just did on his own.
Yeah.
It was pretty good stuff.
Crazy.
But then he realized, the future, 10 years from now, 8 years from now, people will be using Unix-based systems, not these Lisp machine systems. And so I should just try to address the needs of more engineers and not just a small group of artificial intelligence engineers. So that's why
Got it.
Unix copy.
Yeah. But at the heart of it, this idea of open source or free software, it was the original intent of like all these academics that were working together. They were just sharing ideas. There was actually maybe no intention behind it. They were just collaborating.
Correct.
They were just building together. Right.
Yeah.
And, but there was no,
they're like-minded. They wanted to share their,
they had no idea where this was going. It was purely academic probably.
That's correct.
Then, right. And so, but then all of a sudden this academic became, economic.
Right.
And that economic driver is what initially caused like some closed sourcing to happen. And Richard Stallman was kind of like scratching his head, like, wait, this isn't how we were operating, and had to come up with the GPL licenses, right? With that you were involved in, right?
Yeah. So he started a thing called the Free Software Foundation, which was a nonprofit organization. And his goal was to further the spread of free, as in speech, freedom software. And that was, I believe, 1984. And that's when I connected. He just had started, and I connected with him. I said, well, what are we doing? And he said, well, I think we should do this Unix system. I've already got an editor called Emacs. I have a compiler called GCC. These are core components you need to build any system. And I have a debugger so I can figure out what's wrong with the software we write when we're writing software for this new system. And so we should start with that. And I'm going to call it, this is what he said, I'm going to call it Project GNU, spelled GNU. And you pronounce the G so people know it's there. GNU stands for GNU's not Unix.
Yeah.
Yeah. All of his acronyms are recursive.
Yes.
Recursion is a big part of Lisp.
Gotcha. Yeah. And it's like, I kind of, when I think about this time period, I almost wish I was like able to be like a fly on the wall on some of these conversations, because these ideas start with a few people.
Yeah.
And working together on little pieces of software. And then decades later, Unix, Linux, Bash, right? Like these things are on every fucking device on the planet and have created, and
other planets.
And have created like trillions of dollars in economic value.
Yes.
You could easily argue, right? Like whole industries are built on top of these software.
Yeah.
But it started with like, I don't know how many people.
Like first 1, then 2, then 3.
Yeah.
And then a little later on, we had maybe 5 people total, including a staff person in an office.
Yeah.
Answered phones and helped us raise money.
Yeah. And then you guys, and then that's kind of, are you talking about, is that Cygnus?
No, I was still talking about the Free Software Foundation.
Yeah. Okay. You guys were raising money for the Free Software Foundation.
Yeah. Because how else can we get money?
Yeah. So what was that like? Back then were like there believers who were funding this? Like they were like, we believe in free software. This is important.
Yeah. And we ran, we were what you think, we're running on a shoestring. There was no money to speak of. We're lucky if we get, so MIT provided, a space in the lab for Richard Stallman. They gave him an office in the lab, even though he wasn't a member of MIT.
Mm-hmm.
I just gave him an office there. He constructed inside of his office, he put a wall up. So he had 2 rooms. One was his bedroom and one was his office. And he would shower in the showers. Well, he didn't shower because he doesn't like water falling for a while, but he would use the bathrooms to clean up there. And then I would sit in any open space inside the lab and hack. That was the Free Software Foundation.
Wow. Wow.
This is pretty cool.
It is crazy. I mean, and it really is like, the cliche of like a couple engineers like in their pajamas at the office is kind of true, right? Like this is how some of the biggest companies in the world have been built, and the most impactful software too. I think I caveated with that, right? Like, because Bash like didn't really make you money directly, but it had a massive impact.
Yes.
And
If I had a nickel for every time somebody pointed out Bash didn't make me money, I'd be very, very wealthy right now.
But I think also though in a way that it did though, because you wouldn't be where you are without that. I think
doing a podcast with you.
Yeah, exactly. With me. I mean, true.
That's true.
True. Just story.
No,
true story. We won't get down that rabbit hole. So what was the first big business built on open source software? Let's talk about that. Because a lot of questions I get are about, how do you make money? I mean, this is a good segue. How does that work?
The first free software company, commercial company, was called Cygnus. And it was started by John Gilmore, who also wrote the Sun kernel, Michael Tiemann, who wrote the first C++ compiler called G++, built on top of GCC, and Gumby, David Wallace, who was at MIT. He was 17 when I was 24 and met him. He was getting his PhD in, I believe, in world history, but he was sitting at the AI lab working, and he wrote a bunch of useful software. He's a very, very smart individual, as all the three of them are very smart. Michael Tiemann, as I mentioned, wrote G++, but he also became the CTO of Red Hat later on. So they started a company called Cygnus, and Cygnus, spelled CYGNUS. Cygnus is your GNU support. So Cygnus delivered the GNU project software as a set of releases for a year to these enterprise and commercial companies for something on the order of $100K per company. And this was a great deal for those companies because the companies needed the software, but they didn't want to hire people to maintain the existing software. They wanted to make sure everything they got worked and was stable. So to pay $100K for that was way better than paying 4 engineers $150K each or $200K each, right? So that was the reason that company started to succeed. And then as soon as that happened, those companies were also like, hey, could you do a little consulting for us and make this piece of software do that, make the compiler work on this new chip? Motorola was an example of that. They were very closely tied with Cygnus. And then eventually, and Cygnus innovated and created a lot of new and interesting stuff, and it was all 100% open source software.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, I take the inspiration from that for ABK, our company, really trying to build that for our industry, Web3, the future of the internet, and around blockchain technology specifically, primarily on Solana today. I think the dream is to build a company that funds a bunch of 10x engineers that make those kinds of contributions at like the lowest level of Solana. And it's interesting because we started the company basically the same way, just maintaining forks of Solana for people, making it easier to run, and like designing software that would make it easier for us to scale providing that service. And so like one of the things that I have found really interesting is like just the parallels between the beginning of the open source movement and what's happening today. And there's always this question that I get when I talk to entrepreneurs and I'm like, hey, if you open source your software, and they're like, well, what about competition? Or, how do I deal with competitors? Or what if they just steal my stuff? Or how am I going to make money? I don't get the how I'm going to make money part as much because, crypto with token economics has kind of helped solve that problem. But what is your like response to that question around, what if they take my idea?
So I mean, I always think this is funny, right? I have an idea and I tell everyone. And some people say, shh, don't tell everyone your idea. They might steal it. I have 2 responses to that. The first one is, I don't care if you take my idea. I only care if you execute it well. And if you execute it well, then that just shows it was a really good idea.
Yeah.
I'm super happy. The second response is, I'm going to have another idea.
Yeah.
It's what I do. This is what I like to do. Have these ideas. That's what you like to do. Have these ideas. That's why we do the things we do, right? If we weren't good at having ideas, then we wouldn't even be where we're sitting now. And if somebody else wants to take my idea and make that be the core idea of their company and just work on that and try to make that happen and do everything, if they don't have the vision that goes with that idea, they're just not going to succeed.
It's vision. It all comes down to vision and execution, right? And that's always my response as well. It's like, actually, when you release your closed source software, I can see exactly how it works. And you made this point about like messaging apps use that. Like when you release your new badass messaging app, I can see exactly how it works and I can pretty much copy it.
Yeah. The hard part about these applications that people see is the idea of the application. The hard part about writing a dating app isn't writing a dating app. It's understanding that you should have a dating app.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And how should that operate? And how will people interact with that? And how do you protect people while you're doing it? Those are the hard parts. The easy part is like implementing that.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier. Is like my favorite thing about open source to me, and you came with this line, it's the purest form of innovation, but I also think it's the purest form of competition. And in many cases, there aren't really competitors. Like, yeah, you guys might be competing for the same customers, but if you're both contributing to the same open source software, you're just making it better together, especially if you're using a GPL license where all contributions must be open sourced.
Yeah.
And to me, that is the purest form of competition where everybody is just lifting each other up and trying to make each other better.
Yeah.
And I know that might sound naive to some people, but that's just the way that I operate. I'd rather build like that than any other way. And if I can't win in that environment, maybe I'm not good enough. That's kind of my reality, right?
Uh-huh.
And I draw a parallel to jiu-jitsu and wrestling. It's the same thing. Like the people that I compete against are trying to help me get better. I'm trying to help them get better.
Listen, I'm 260. I weigh like 260. You think I could take you in a street fight?
Maybe.
I'm 260, bro.
I'm being kind.
I'm 260, bro.
As long as I don't let you land on top of me, I'm good. As long as I can scrap around.
Let the record show I don't think I can take Brandon Skate fight. I don't even think Bradley Martin can take you in a street fight.
Who's Bradley Martin?
He's 260, bro.
Oh, well, ankle picks. Yeah. That's all I have for you. Ankle pick.
100%. Sorry, didn't mean to distract from that.
No, that's good.
So yes, the point is though, building up a bigger ecosystem so that there are more places for innovation and more opportunities to succeed really just means more people will succeed. It doesn't mean you will fail. And in fact, it gives you more opportunity to succeed.
Yep. And I will never forget. So I met Toli and Raj. I can't remember if it was 2017 or 2018, but I know that
2017, because I went to meet Toli with you.
Yeah. Well, it was whenever we met them before, but then we actually went to sit down with Raj and Toli at the office on Howard Street, that old office that they used to have. And so whenever that was, when we first sat down with them, we'd run into him at a conference or something like that before. And I asked Toli just to like see what he would say. I already knew what the right answer was because you and I had talked extensively about open source. I was like, hey, so what if people fork your code and just run with your idea? They had this proof of history thing and they were doing this L1, the high throughput, NASDAQ at the speed of light or whatever, blockchain. And I was like, it's a pretty good idea. Like what happens if they just take it? And they were shipping open source software in a public repo every day. Yep. And at the time, like I'd been to every conference in the space and you and I had read like hundreds of white papers at that point. A lot of stuff was saying it was open source, but these people were really building in closed source repos behind closed doors. And they were basically glorified like academic research projects with like hundreds of millions of funding in some cases. Yep. And so I ran into Toli and his answer was like, dude, we hope you fork it. Go fork it, work on it, make it better. Yeah. And a lot of people don't understand how much of an open source maxi he is. And that has been a part of the core culture of Solana since day one. Yeah. And
since day one, they've said, go fork yourself.
Go fork yourself. And I think that's a big reason they built such a big community and why it succeeded. I mean, the technology is superior, obviously. But I think that's been a huge part of it. And even today, he still encourages that forking of the software. Yeah. It's happening more. And he's even invested in some of these other like alt SVM chains or network extensions, whatever you want to call them, because they're driving innovation in the space. They're like, the Zen protocol guys who we know pretty well, they just took out voting fees, right? For the validators. And that is a very expensive part of running a node on Solana is you got to pay 1.5 SOL or something like that, like every epoch. And so they just removed it. And making that kind of economic change on mainnet right now could be kind of a big deal, like hard to do, and it'd be a big change to the economy. But this other like alt L1, like those guys are just sending it, right? And so Solana gets to see how that works out. And if it works out great, they can easily just remove that from, they can look at how Solana, which is the Zen team's blockchain, implemented it and just implement it.
Yep.
And this is why you want the proliferation of your technology as far as possible,
100%.
because you get that innovation out of it. And those network effects, I think, are really not understood.
With true open source, everything that I do to the open source that you give me, you get.
Yeah.
That's how true open source works. And that means that I'm not taking ideas from you. It means I'm sharing ideas back and forth, which is really valuable. It means that I know, wow, you were focused on building this side of the building, and I'm interested in this little part over here, which you're not interested in. So instead of me begging you to build this little part that you don't care about, I can just scratch my own itch and build that little part and give it to you.
Yeah.
And now your software has more things on it. This is what happened with Linux, for example, with all the kernel modules. Everybody was like, hey, I have a file system and I wish it worked in Linux. And the answer is, go ahead and run a driver.
Yeah.
It automatically works.
So you were telling me something earlier, and we didn't cover this, but but Linux started as a monolithic repo.
Yeah.
But it eventually became more modular, right?
It did become more modular. But the idea was that he didn't want to use Linus had a whole set of working tools. We'd built a vast pile of the software that needed to be in a complete Unix-based system. And we had started work on the kernel, and we announced we're going to work on this thing, and it's going to be based on the Mach kernel, which is a microkernel, a specific type of architecture. And Linus was like, I don't like that architecture. It's not my favorite thing. So I'm going to write a different kernel because I have all these tools. I have everything else I need to build a complete working system. I'll just write my own kernel. So he wrote a kernel, and voila, he had a running system called Linux. Now, the Free Software Foundation did not execute. I was leaving the foundation at that time, did not execute with the people they had in there to finish building the Mach kernel. So they didn't. However, Mac people built Mac System 10, which is GNU utilities plus a Mach kernel called Darwin.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. All this stuff is based on, this is what happens when you have good free open source software.
Yeah, and you just don't know where it's going to go.
Exactly.
And that's the thing that I'm like most excited about, this stuff that we're doing, why I wanted to build a company that we could contribute to open source software together in our own way. Like, I'm not a software engineer, but like I can help build the business that then funds the engineers and the innovations.
Well, tomorrow you'll be a software engineer, because tomorrow you'll just ask your AI to write the application for you.
Well, that's a good segue. So if we're thinking about like what the future is, what is the future with AI? Because I'd love to hear your perspective, especially since like, I wonder how like your experience and seeing what happened in the early days of open source and what's possible, like what's the future with AI and then open source AI?
So the longer vision, which isn't that far away, is that AI will do what everybody's scared it's going to do. It's going to take away all our jobs. And I can't tell you how happy I will be when that happens, because that just means we're going to have 7 days of weekend instead of only 2. I will have things to do. I will do all those pursuits I've always wanted to do. I'll be playing catch with my kids if that's the right time of year, the right age to do that. I'll be surfing. I'll be making art. I'll be communicating with other human beings about things that human beings care about, like love, passion, poetry. I'll be doing those things. And maybe I'll be innovating, creating brand new, interesting ideas to make life easier and better for everybody around me. And AI will be farming my vegetables and building my cars and building my housing and distributing the resources of Earth to all parts of the other parts of the Earth, so we don't have world hunger anymore. And there's no reason to argue and fight over resources.
You really think you could do that? I mean, like, how do we avoid the other downside scenario where like it's weaponized and becomes dystopian and doesn't actually create that utopia? Because like that's my worry, is about the speed and the speed of change, the rate of change, because like all these jobs getting lost, people not having these systems in a world, for the world you're talking about to exist, you have to have like a society that supports it. And that society doesn't exist right now.
So it turns out the vast majority of the people on this planet would like that, would like all of the resources on this planet to be shared in such a way that everybody has an abundance of resources, because the planet has an abundance of resources for our needs. We just don't share them the proper way. And we struggle over land mass, and we have wars over ideology. These things are not required anymore. I mean, even wars over ideology aren't really required anymore. And the reason we still have them is because we have centralized governments that have a vested interest, financial, economic, mostly power, have a power interest in keeping certain things status quo. Here in the United States, the voters are telling us in every way they possibly can, we don't like the status quo. And this is why we are electing people who are not politicians. We're electing people who have never seemed to have been inside this politician structure. Now, unfortunately, we're kind of electing people who I believe are not looking out for the best interests of the country because they're not politicians. They don't have training in that thing. They just like the power aspect. That's my belief. But that's besides the point. The most important thing is the people of the United States are saying, we're not interested in the status quo. And this is happening worldwide. The reason you see all these political shifts is because people are saying, we're tired of being controlled by a government that we're not really part of.
Yep.
That's what they feel like. So I think the democratization of these things is done through crypto and through artificial intelligence. And then suddenly those things don't matter anymore. If we have everyone on the planet contributing to the distribution of resources, animosity kind of disappears. I don't care if you're a believer in Allah and I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. These things don't actually, I don't need to fight you because you can believe what you believe and I can believe what I believe, and it doesn't affect me. It only affects me when your government shows up and tells me what I should believe. That's when I get affected.
So, you've got this knack for kind of collecting people around you, and you did this with me, like kind of found me out, well, through Steve Bell. I was just like a solo entrepreneur working at a coffee shop. She took me in, and that really helped me get my career going. And you do this with our business partner, Alexander Guy, and a handful of other people. If you're coming up to another 24-year-old, like when we met, I was about 24, maybe 25, on the street, and they're like, maybe they have a CS degree or something like that. And they're like, hey, Brian, I want to start a company. What do you tell them to do?
I mean, that's an interesting question. The first question I ask is, well, tell me about your company, because I'm really curious about what their passion is. If they're very passionate about something, if they have a vision of a future that is better than today's future, and they think this is the path to get there, my only advice to them would be like, are you sure this is the path to get there? Because if they really have this vision and they have the passion for it, that's exactly what they should do. They should never start a business because they just want to make money. That's destined to fail. Yeah.
I mean, that resonates with me because I'm 38 now, and this is I don't know how many companies we started together, a bunch, but I feel like ABK is the best one that we've started together.
100%.
And our ethos is just built together.
Yep.
And we believe open source software is the purest form of innovation. And I literally get out of bed in the morning excited about that. Just because I want to build open source software. I mean, I know it sounds like kind of vague, but I want to build open source software. I want to build things that kind of have the impact that you had with Bash and Linux and stuff like that. But I want to build it on crypto rails, right?
Because you understand. If if the people build together, we build bigger and better.
Yeah, 100%. And there just happens to be a ton of work to do to push Solana and Web3 forward,
Yep.
where we can contribute great talent and engineering to cutting edge technology that's already been built and worked on, but needs to be improved.
Yeah.
There's plenty of work to be done there, and we can contribute to it. And we have no idea where it will take us. We're just trying to solve the hardest problem we can and contribute to open source software with other people that we like working with.
Yep.
And so that's fun.
And our focus right now is making the existing technology more accessible to people who want to use it. So we make it faster to stand up a cluster of nodes using SVM kit. We might make the validator much easier to distribute or much easier to use so that you can run it on your cell phone, or you can run it in see, I'm giving all our ideas away.
Sorry, you can talk about.
Because this will democratize it. This will make it easier for people to build applications. And right now, there's no real applications on crypto except for finance, just straight finance.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's not the way this works. Good technology spreads through everything and makes everything better. Let's get real applications built.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I think that's a good note to end on. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Alex.
All right, that's perfect.